Just hello to everyone joining us today, and welcome to our webinar, Break the Mold of Negativity Around Rules. For those of you I haven't had the opportunity to connect with as of yet, my name is Patricia Thacker, and I'm the Executive Director of the Chartered Governance Institute of Canada. First and foremost, I'd like to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today. The presentation will be in the format of an open discussion and just a few logistical notes. The call is being recorded and will be available as an on-demand link after the session. That link will be distributed by the National Office within a week. We hope that you'll consider leaving your camera on because it is an open discussion. But if you're having any difficulties with broadband issues, you can consider turning your video off. You will still be able to see the speaker and the presentation. To limit your background noise, you have been muted as you join. Please keep your microphone on mute unless you are speaking. If you wish to participate in the discussion and you are having any difficulty finding the mute unmute button, you can hold down your space bar while you are speaking to temporarily unmute yourself. Now, I'm pleased to introduce our presenter, Lewis Eisen. Got it. Lewis has had a storied working career, having been employed as a lawyer, an IT manager, a business consultant, an information management specialist, and a government policy worker. Now, Lewis combines all these roles and teaches people how to draft policies that are helpful and engaging rather than confrontational and bossy. He is the author of the international best-selling book, How to Write Rules That People Want to Follow, a guide to writing respectful policies and directives. And now I will turn the presentation over to you, Lewis.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone, whatever it is there by your time zone now. I appreciate your coming, and I know you have other things drawing your time, so I'm going to make sure that you get some good value out of this next hour. Can I ask you just to configure your Zoom a little bit? Can everyone find the chat window and flip that open? And I'll know that you have it open if you just type in the name of the city you're sitting in now. So we can just see where people are coming from. Good. Oh, look at that. Oh, good, good, good. Wonderful. Okay, and then I'm going to circle the names of those people in places I want to vacation this winter. Good. Wonderful, everybody. Okay. We are going to have a discussion here. This is not just I'm talking to you. I'm going to try and facilitate a discussion, and I'm going to ask you, when you participate, do what's easiest. So if you just have a short answer, enter it into the chat. That way we'll get a number of people entering the chat. We can all read what's going on at the same time. But if you think it's easier to explain by voice, just do that. Unmute yourself, put up your hand or something so that we know. If you're not showing video now, it does help if you show your video with the hand so that we know you want to talk, and I'm happy to do that. So whatever's easiest for you. Let me tell you why I got into this field. About 10 years ago, I went to work at Industry Canada, and I was taken in as director of records. And I arrived there, and the staff, my senior staff, came to me and said, "Oh, we have a terrible problem. Nobody's following the rules." So I looked at their policies, and they were full of all kinds of absolute terms like always and never and no exceptions, with lots of bold and underline and italics and lots of exclamation marks. And I couldn't figure out the exclamation marks, but I realized that there's one exclamation mark for each lash that they would give you if you disobeyed that rule. So it was very, very strict. It was really at that point I started to realize that policies have a tone of voice. So when we talk to people in policies, we are talking to them, and they hear the tone of voice, even if they hear it subconsciously, and they react to that tone of voice. So I want to explore some of these tones and how you can avoid negative tones of voice and what some of the negative tones of voice mean. That's what I want to spend our time with. Is that good for everybody? Good, wonderful. And I'm going to start by showing you a policy document that I found in a Starbucks one day. Now, it's a little hard to read like this, but I'm going to expand it. It was on the wall. Oh, shoot. Sorry about that. There we go. That expands it. And basically, it starts by saying, welcome to Starbucks. We strive to create a culture of warmth and belonging and respectfully request that everyone. That's a nice start. And then you have all these rules. So what's your reaction to those rules? Do you want to just take a moment and just type some in the chat when you read that? What do you think? How do you react? How does that hit you? Yeah, I agree. Which is a little harsh, absolutely. Some of it is common sense. Robert, can I pick on you for a sec? When you're saying it's common sense, some of the parts of the common sense they shouldn't have to tell us. Is that your point? Or feel free to speak by voice.
Yeah, I would say so. That they're
good.
In the absence of a policy, you would expect the individuals to behave like that.
Right. Absolutely. Okay. And I agree. Kanchan's a lot of negative language. And Mohar, absolutely, this is not a like. There's a number of things going on here, and I want to take them apart, point them out, so you see what there is. The first is that it is all the things you're not supposed to do, rather than what you're supposed to do. There's all a list of don'ts. But they didn't stop at the list of don'ts. That is, they could have just said, no smoking, consuming alcohol, etc. But they said, smoking, consuming alcohol is not permitted. They could have just said, no unreasonable noise, but they said, unreasonable noise is not tolerated. These value judgments that come down. Now, do you think this helps or hurts Starbucks when you see this on the wall? And yes, Dan, they actually were prepared by lawyers. So what do you think? What's the effect in terms of clientele? What's the effect on you were you to walk in there and read that? It's not welcoming. I agree. Yes, Patricia, I agree. You look at this and you go, do I really want to be in this coffee shop? I don't even know. I don't even want to know what's going on in the washrooms. Don't tell me, unreasonable use. Like, I don't want to know, I'm going to go down the street to some place that doesn't seem to have this many problems. So, Susan, you say it depends if you're a rule follower or a person who generally doesn't care about rules and challenges. And actually, those two do react differently, but they do both react. So the people who are rule followers tend to look at this and they go, well, that wasn't meant for me. They weren't addressing this to me. They're addressing it to the bad people. The people who tend to challenge rules, they look at it and they say, oh, you know what? This is a preemptive strike. They're doing this to me. And in fact, sometimes, and this has been pointed out to me, that there are certain disadvantaged groups that really feel targeted, like homeless people. Look at this and they say, you know what? They're targeting it to us. But disadvantaged groups where they feel, they feel that somehow there's a community problem and they do feel particularly targeted. The issue is, do you get your back up or do you go along with it? Now, most of us, we are so used to reading signs in this kind of language that we tend to dismiss it. Somebody said to me, a lot of millennials go to Starbucks and they won't put up with being spoken to like that. And I think that's true. But why do you? And I get to say, well, I'm used to it. That's the way it's always been. It doesn't hit me. It doesn't bother me anymore. Let me show you the sign in my doctor's office. Hard to read, but I pulled it. It's hands behind the receptionist counter. What do you think? Yeah, isn't it? And like, people are nervous when they walk into a doctor's office often, and they look like, oh my God, it's terrible. It really is. Now, my doctor is very apologetic because it's put up there by the clinic. It doesn't represent the doctor. In fact, more importantly, it doesn't represent the people behind the counter. Yet they wear it because it looks like it's a message from them to us. That's what it looks like. But it really doesn't represent, they're actually really nice people. But I ask myself the same thing. What's gone on at this clinic that they felt so compelled to post that kind of sign? What I haven't seen that in a lot of other doctors' offices. What's happened to this clinic that this pushed them forward? Patricia, you've raised the issue of don't always know what qualifies as rude and aggressive behavior. And I just want to address that. Very often, a sign or rule might use a term like appropriate dress or appropriate conduct or something like that. There are two issues. One is it may not be clear to everyone what appropriate dress is, for instance. But more often, it actually is clear to everyone and the people just don't want to do it. And where we're seeing that a lot is COVID. It's quite clear what the appropriate protection is in COVID, and there are people who just do not want to do it. So you can always pull the sign apart that it isn't as specific as you might like it to be, but in fact, that the non-specificity isn't the objection of the sign. It's the tone of voice, okay? And you're dealing with people who, obviously this, again, I look at this and I say, well, somebody must have been rude and aggressive, but it wasn't me. Where did we learn to talk like this, do you think? Where did we learn to use phrases like is not tolerated or unacceptable, is prohibited? Or to say to people, if you do not leave, the authorities will be called. Where do we pick up that kind of tone of voice? One of them, Nicola, is the laws, but not quite, and I'm going to show you that. Something a little closer to home. I think so, Shannon. Patricia, would you sit up straight, please? Dan, stop fidgeting. Kanchan, I don't want to see you doing that again. What we learned growing up was that rules should sound bossy. If something is going to be a rule, it should sound like we're ordering somebody to do something. That's what we learned. Now, in fairness to my parents, just so you know, I don't blame everything that went wrong in my life on my parents. What they were modeling for us, I believe, was how adults in charge make rules for the children they're in charge of. That's what they were modeling, not how adults make rules for other adults. So, when my mom said to us, if you don't eat your vegetables, you're not going to get dessert, she really should have followed that up by, but when you grow up and you have company, don't say it to them like that. She didn't, but we have to learn that on our own. But the fact is that when you ask people, for instance, to make rules, or could you create a standard or create a policy, their posture changes. They sit up, they become the parent, and they start looking at, well, I'm going to tell you what to do, what you should do, what you should do, what you should do. So I challenge that. I think that the right way to set policy is not in this must, should. This is all very negative. And somebody pointed out the amount of negative language in the Starbucks, failure to do so, this kind of stuff. The most powerful policy statement is a simple sentence in the present tense. Anyone have a problem with this as a policy statement? Our policy is that office hours are from 9 to 5. Straightforward. It's simply describing the way things are. It's not saying you must anything. This is the way things are. Now, the fact that office hours start at 9 might mean that certain things have to happen at 9. Well, those get listed, but they're not written in a parental tone of voice. Sometimes we see this and it's very subtle. So let me show you an example of a policy where this is an HR policy, very typical of ones that you might see at an organization. Why did they write this policy? What's happened at this organization that caused them to come out with a policy like this? I think so. Think more. Yes, they're getting a lot of last minute requests. Yeah, agreed. So the next question is, how do they feel about it in that office? The fact that they're getting all these last minute requests and people are leaving posts uncovered and disappear without notice, how do they feel about that? I agree, Patricia. How are they feeling as employees? They don't like it. Frustrated, I agree. That was Patricia. Oh, different Patricia. Yeah, Patricia's all frustrated. I agree. I don't think they're not. I think they're probably feeling unappreciated, maybe irrelevant. They're feeling their authority is violated. They could feel disrespected. Absolutely. Now, we've all been there. We've all had rules and other people have not followed the rules and we get frustrated or we get upset. We've all had that. The question is that frustration and upset appropriate to show up in the policy? And I don't think it is. That is, the policy should be neutral. If I neutralize this policy and just put it this way, it's still quite clear that we need 1 week's notice. On both sides of this line, we're telling you that our policy is to get a week's notice. But on the left side, the harsh side, we're not only asking you to buy into the week's notice, we're asking you to buy into our threat and to buy into our pissy attitude. That's what we're asking you to buy into there on the left. Whereas the one on the right is very neutral. It doesn't give away the fact that we have a problem. The way that office in the medical office gave away the fact that they seem to have a behavior problem in their lobby. They've just given that away by announcing it. Okay. I don't know how many of you, any of you work for a government of some kind? Can you just type in yes in the field? In the chat area? No? Well, you're lucky then. Because government has open government coming around it, which means everything. Jen, is your government have open government rules applied to it? A policy of transparency. Okay, you know what that means? When you put your policy out for everybody to see it, they're all going to know that you have a problem too. And they're all going to know that you're pissed that people aren't getting you the 7 days notice. It's not the kind of information you want to be giving out to people. Now, I have to tell you, when I started giving these kinds of lectures, and my best friend is a policeman, and he went, yeah, right, he said. Yeah, that nice, touchy-feely language might be really good for some organizations, but it is not going to work in the police force. He said, we are a command and control organization. We are paramilitary. You have to word the rules strictly so that everybody knows you mean business. Okay, well, is that true? From my perspective as a lawyer, I would say that the strictest laws in any country, and we've got a number of countries represented here, the strictest laws are the criminal laws. The laws against murder, kidnapping, treason, all that kind of stuff. How are they worded? Do they say people must never assault one another? Murdering other people is absolutely not tolerated. No exceptions will be made. That's not the way they're worded. They're actually worded in a very matter-of-fact manner, in Canada even, in the present tense. A person who commits murder is guilty of an offense and shall be sentenced to imprisonment. There's no you must, there's no, there's no emotional overtone. There's no parent-child dynamic here. You see that? very, very matter of fact. Every person who commits robbery is guilty of an offense and liable to imprisonment for life under these terms. I'm just telling you that. Govern yourself accordingly. Here's what we do when we find someone guilty of robbery. You're an adult, you can make your decision. So we have a situation in this country and many countries where the strictest laws for the most heinous crimes in the country are worded more respectfully than the policies that come out of many of our organizations. In fact, if you didn't know any better, you might be tempted to think that murdering your boss isn't half as bad as not changing the toner in the photocopier. Because boy, you should see that rule. They're really mean about that rule. The fact is that in most organizations, when the harsher language that you see, the harsher the language is, the more commanding it is usually an indication of either a faulty enforcement process or a lack of an enforcement process, or a dysfunctional organization, command and control hierarchy, where they feel they need to write in this way. 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, everybody in the office, I look back at this, this kind of thing. The bosses in the office, this is the way they talked, and this is the way they wrote. Today, nobody talks to their employees like that, but they're still writing that way. This is not a deliberate thing. This is not because these people are mean or control freaks or anything. This is just fell off the radar. I didn't think to look at the tone of voice. I didn't think to hear it from the reader's point of view, to make this a client-centric point of view. But you know what? These policies that you have in your office form part of the employee experience and part of the customer experience. And your policies, things like return policy, exchange policy, etc., they form part of that experience long after the sale. And your employment policies, they form part of the experience long after the contract. Nicole is asking about the fact that we inherit a lot of old style policy. Yes, we do. And it's very often people take the old style and are not really sure how to word it. And so on the other hand, Nicole, I've had some people push back at me and say, no, I think we should be saying you must do this and you must do that. Funny enough, I know I won't pull anybody out here. When I get pushback, it's a lawyer usually. Not always. I mean, a lot of lawyers like this approach and they say, oh, for sure, we agree. But the lawyers who push back say, this won't stand up in court. And the problem with that is it's not a contract. You're not writing a policy to stand up in court. Like if that's the tenor of your organization, that we're going to put in policies to cover our butts in case we have to take people to court, you're going to have a problem. Your policy is to help people work together and set targets and get people to buy in. I'm going to show you some examples of that. So the policy has a lot more of a role than a simple contract does. So the fact that it may not be legally defensible, but you know what, that's okay. So if I'm in my organization and I have a policy that I say to everyone, hey, at the end of the day, would everyone please lock their desk? And everybody does. I don't need to write it into a policy. Even if I need them to do that, I said, everybody lock their desk and everybody does every day. Like, why make a problem when there's not a problem? This is something we're all cooperating together with. You see it a lot in these types of policies where you see the language that's reflected on the left much more than the one that's on the right. But the easiest way to do it is just to describe, well, this is the way it is. Our dress code is business casual. Our policy is that dress code is business casual. And to hit Patricia's point earlier, you may have to describe what business casual is later. Doesn't mean you can, it's not the entire policy, but this isn't saying you must dress this way. There's no you must in. The entire Wisconsin Criminal Code manages to use the word must 7 times in the entire document, even though it's prohibiting murder, treason, assault, everything. It just doesn't use the word must. It talks about, and it's got a much more neutral language. And the problem is that everybody in the organization wears this policy if it's not worded well. So a woman named Suzanne came to me and said, when I look for a job, I ask to see their policies because I want to see how they're talking to people. I want to see how they talk to their employees. And if I don't like the way they're talking to people, I'm not going to work there. Now, good help is hard to find. And somebody who does their due diligence to really investigate the corporation before they work there, that's the kind of person you would really want. But you're going to lose that person, and the worst thing is you'll never know why. Somebody who looks at the policies and says, I don't like the way they communicate with employees, is going to say, I'm just not going to work here. They're not going to come and say, would you fix these for me? They're just going to, I don't think this is the right environment, and they'll move on. Now, does it really make a difference? Well, in most cases, policies of organizations are actually meant to be helpful, not harmful. And I'm going to show you an organization here. I'm going to show you a web page. Now, does that say cancellation refund policy on your screen? Yeah, good. Okay. So this is the County Carleton Law Association, and this is their cancellation of refund policy. So they hold programs just the way this one is held. They charge something, and this is the way they've worded the cancellation policy. What do you think? Yeah, Lee, I have to tell you, I think there's only one set of 10 policies that are allowed to start with thou shalt, and your company didn't write them. Okay? You've hit the right ones. Those 10 can start with thou shalt. This cancellation policy, it actually is meant to be helpful. They're trying to help people so they can't make it to the event. So they're saying, well, gee, unfortunately, we can't refund you, but we're happy for you to send someone else. So if they had said that, we will accept refunds up to 5 days prior to the event. After that, I'm afraid we can't accept refunds, but please send someone else in your place. Okay. They could have worded this actually to be very helpful. Now, obviously, this is a law site, so it was written by lawyers, and I get that. But even so, you see it says, please be advised that all refunds carry a $30 administration fee. What does please be advised mean? It's got a very specific meaning, because they could have just said refunds less a $30 administration fee will be provided, but they didn't. They took a whole sentence and started it with please be advised. Why? What message are they trying to send? It's very specific. Any thoughts? Thank you, Nicola. Yes. Don't say we didn't tell you. I don't want to hear that we didn't tell you because we're telling you right now, please be advised. But I mean, gee, it's we formally advise people when we break contracts. This is not an adversarial type of situation. This is supposed to be a friendly situation. So, but they're going to give you your entire money back less $30. They're actually being very nice, but the way they've worded it sounds that, they're sort of throwing the fact, no, we're still in control. We still have rules. We're still in charge. I have to tell you that contacted this group and I said, you know, your policy is a little harsh, and I kind of use it for the before policy instead of the after version. And they told me where to go, and said that I wasn't allowed to copy their policy at all. So just so you know, we're on the website live. Okay, we're there now, and that's what they have up. So I'm not copying it, but it sends out messages. Let me tell you another example, and this is a case. Here's a case where somebody's used must, where there's no must involved, or it's not really a must that's involved. So people are they're very hung up on the must and may and the mandatory and the optional, etc. But if you look at this, what's the must? Who is the person who must do something? It's not the employee. Any thoughts? Thank you. You don't see it on the screen. It's because my screen doesn't show me that it isn't there. So I have to keep remembering. Sorry about that. We're on here. Do we see employee file access? Good, thank you. Sorry about that. No wonder everyone's looking confused. So there we have a must in that sentence on a situation which is really not about must. Who is that must directed to? Who are they trying to make something mandatory to? Maybe it's HR if the corporate, the people who have the files, IT if they're holding the files, okay, the records room if they're holding the files. So this is really an order to the people holding the files to give them to the employees. But the decision behind this is that employees are entitled to have access to their files. And we should be going on the presumption that if employees are entitled to access, then all these people who have the files are happy to comply. We don't need to order them to comply as a separate policy. There's micromanagement there. You see that? And I'm sure that isn't an issue. Like, do we really have cases where IT is not giving the file to people who are entitled to it? I don't think so. But instead of just wording it as this is the decision that's actually being made, they needed to use a must formula. And so that's the way the must comes out. But there's no must that's necessary here. Very, very often, must is actually is hiding a authority that you're giving someone, an entitlement, maybe a precondition. You're saying that this event happens before that event, and so you use the word must. We must not do that event until this event happens, but you're just setting an order of conditions. And the word must, it just keeps hitting people. I got to tell you a story about Kindle and what they did. It was actually very clever. My book is coming out in 3rd edition within a week, okay? And so I converted it to Kindle. And Kindle's got this very convoluted set of regulations you have to follow because they don't have real colors, right? So I get there and there's a page. The wrong way to do it, and they didn't do it, is if I showed up and it said, here are the colors that you must use for highlighting. So the printed version uses a very rich burgundy against a white background. And they're saying, no, here. Now, if you're like me, you probably looked at those and God, could they find 5 uglier colors to give me, right? Like, why are they giving me that? But they didn't do that. They did this very cleverly. They didn't say, here are the colors you must use. What they did is say, here is our policy. Our policy is that we conform to WC3 recommendations. We conform to whatever they're doing. Now, it's hard for me not to buy into that. If I'm looking at this and the policy said, you better use this, oh God, you know what, Mummy says so, I have to use these colors. This policy is much, much easier for me to buy into. Okay, yeah, I can see conforming to the recommendations. And now I say, how do you do that? How do I do that? So they then provide a formula that you can use to calculate these colors. And it's quite technical. And I look at it and yeah, okay, I guess I could figure it out. I guess I'm technical enough, but why don't you just tell me the colors that I can use? And that would be better. And then they showed me this screen. Well, there you go. Now this same screen is solving a problem that exists because I bought into the policy the way they worded the first time. But if they'd started with this and said, you must use one of these colors, I would have thought, oh, they really don't know what they're doing. Anyone see the difference? Yeah? No questions there? A number of people have asked me about the how technical a policy can be. And I have to tell you, I do not believe that policies need to be understood by everyone. I do not believe policies need to be plain languaged. I go into a hospital and they have this policy. I have no clue what it means. I have friends who are doctors and they say, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense, but I have no clue what it means. But whether I understand it or not is irrelevant. What's important is that all the doctors understand it and all the doctors can agree on what it means. And if they can do that, they can explain it to the rest of us. Makes sense? So a lot of people think that the policy has to be in real language, but you know what? Nobody reads policies. And I'll prove it to you. Can you just by say either show of hand or typing in there, type yes if you've filled out an income tax return ever in the last 20 years? Either a show of hands or yes. Good. Okay. So all you people who filled out an income tax return, did you read the Income Tax Act first? See, that's the policy. Thank you, Donna. Donna has read it. Donna, are you a lawyer? No, just relevant. Yeah, okay, no. Yes. So the truth is that most people, when they read is the little booklet that comes with it, says how to fill out your tax return. And that booklet distills in plain language everything you need to know in the income tax report. It helps you do your job. I don't care if I can't understand the income tax report. What's important to me is that the accountants all agree on what it means, the accountants and the tax lawyers. Because if they don't agree on the interpretation of those, we have a problem. Same as the hospital. If the doctors can't agree on what this policy means, then we have a problem. In many cases in organizations, that is actually what you find, that the experts can't actually agree on what the rule means. But if they know what it means, then they can explain it to the rest of us. Lee, I agree 100%. So my only caution is that I don't think it's necessary to dumb down a policy just because there are technical words that not everybody uses. So if the technical words help us get the clarity on what this rule is about, then it's serving its purpose. And if we need to translate that for someone else, well, that's what guidance is. That's what that little booklet is. That's the set of how-to instructions. You know, if you wanted to, if you play chess, there is an official set of rules for chess that's kept in by the Fédération Internationale des Échecs in France, the official rules of chess. But if you wanted to learn how to play chess, you're not going to read the rules. You're going to go to a book that says how to play chess. That's written directly for you to tell you how to do what you need to do. The rules, the policies are there in case you need them. They're there in case you need to go back to them. So most people will never have to see the policies. If you write your guidance well and you write it positively, most people will never have to go back and look at the policies. The only time they will see it is if somebody storms down into your office and says, show me where it says this in the policy. My supervisor says I can't chew bubble gum. Where does it say that in the policy? And then you pull the policy out of your back pocket and you show them. Right here, no masticating substances. That means bubble gum. That's the only time you need the policy. The policy is the backbone for the booklet that helps people do their job, for the office manual, if you like. So an office needs an office manual to tell people what to do, and behind the manual, you need a structure, which usually is a policy. Our challenge then is to make sure that when we set the policies, the rules that we want, like down here, again, that we're just setting out the rule. We're not setting out messages on top of that we don't mean to be sending, because those only get people's back up. There, most people say, you know what, no, I really want to engage people. I want them to want to follow our policies. We're all a happy family here. Well, good. Let's just make sure that you don't have anything in there that's going to get people's back up. And it's sometimes hard to see as the writer. You know, it's like trying to watch a play if you're standing on the stage. You can't do it. You need to give it to somebody else to read and say, how does this sound to you? Any questions there? I've got a couple more things, but please, any questions, challenges, disagreements? I want to show you a very clever sign that I found. It was in a museum, an art museum, Boston Museum of Fine Arts, actually. You know, museum has all kinds of rules on what you can do and what you can't do. And I'm sure you've seen the signs on the wall of museums. Don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. The Boston Museum of Fine Arts very cleverly did a different kind of sign. Which is not there. Let me just check. Sorry about that. It should be there. All right, give me half a moment. My apologies. Give me half a moment. I'm going to pull this up now that I've told you. Well, talk amongst yourselves. Oh, I can't find it. All right, I have to tell you, the sign, oh, I'm sorry, it's not there. The sign is a bunch of neon words that say wander, touch, read, photograph. And then there's a word flash and a line through it. Word chat, hum, and then a word noise with a line through it. It's just very, very clever, very subtle. Basically, we want you to do all these positive things, and we have some things that you can't do. I'm sorry that it's not in there. Should be in the end, but I can send it after, actually. Instead of spending time now, I can send it after, looking if people really want to see it. Okay. Any thoughts here? Okay. Let me go then to one other area, which is, how do you make people do what you want them to do if you're not going to say must? Good policies should provide guidance. Yes, I agree with that, Lee. Orientation and training should be provided to drive best practices. I agree with that too. If the policy is technical, it doesn't need to be read by everybody. It only needs to sit in the background. The policy is a framework. That's a position I would say. It's not that people shouldn't have access to the policies to see what they are. The thing is, most policies contain all kinds of stuff that is not policy. There are statements like, all chemicals must be handled in accordance with the Hazardous Substances Act. Well, guess what? That's true anyways. That's not your policy. You don't have a right to make that policy. They have to handle it in accordance with that act, whether or not you make that policy. Employees may not do illegal activities on the premises. Well, you know what? They're not allowed to anyways. You know, those are not necessary as policies. So most policies, in fact, contain all kinds of stuff that they don't need to contain, which is why they're so long. They're bloated with other things. So generally, though, would say that in most cases, your policy, and you know what, I'm going to go even further. What people tend to do is they look at their policies and they say, what do we need to change? What do we need to fix? What do we need to update? And I'm not sure that's the right approach. If you got your policies that set the rules behind you, and you have, for what I'll, lack of a better term, I'll call the office manual, the thing that everybody else has to read, and that describes the way you would like things to work. If you could just hand out that description of the way you would like things to work and everybody followed it, you wouldn't need any policies. Some of those rules in the way you would like things to work are going to need people at the top confirming it. Those sections in your manual need to be footnoted to that authority. So you might need a decision. So there will be cases where, you know what, everybody does have a dress code, everybody's agreed, but what we can't agree on is whether open-toed shoes are or are not appropriate. We seem to agree on everything else, we can't agree on the two. So you know what, great. Let's get a decision from someone on the open-toed shoes and have a policy about that, and that's all we need. We need that one line because everything else is not in contention. And we're working very well here. The part of the move that I'm suggesting is not just the change from the parent-child dynamic to the adult-adult dynamic, but the change from the notion of I make a policy and I want compliance to I set a policy, a target, and I'd like cooperation. What do I need to do to get people to cooperate with that policy? Sometimes they have no choice, but I'm going to give you an example that's very common. Meetings, people don't show up on time. Okay, I've had a number of people that they got meetings and people don't show up on time. So one organization told me their management put a sign up on the wall on every meeting room saying meetings must start on time. And it did absolutely nothing, which I'm not surprised. You can't really control what other people do. All you can control is what you do in reaction to what they do. So if people are going to be late, what are you going to do in reaction to that? If this is going to be a really hard and fast rule, what would you do? Any thoughts? What could you do? I see some typing, so. Okay. So our policy is we charge $5 to latecomers. That's our policy. And you're an adult and you can make the decision on whether or not you want to show up on time. Great. Start your meeting. Our policy is that meetings start on time. Okay, that's what we do. And if we're not, if you say they miss the beginning, that's a natural consequence, Patricia. Sorry, distraction there. Someone's issued issue warning. You know, theaters had this problem for a very long time. And they don't say on your ticket, you better not be late, you must show up on time, right? They say, we seat latecomers at the first opportunity. Govern yourself accordingly. So most of the times when people don't, they have a rule that says, you must not be late to meetings, and there's no consequence. There's nothing about what you're going to do. It's because the organization really doesn't know what it's going to do. They don't have them. They just know they don't like it, but they really don't have any plans on what they're going to do. And it's even worse if you say, show up at the meeting on time or there may be consequences. You know what that sounds like? That sounds like my mother going, don't push me. You won't want to know what I'm going to do if you push me that far. Don't do that. Which doesn't allow me as an adult to make some decisions. The policies, you've talked about things and to-do policies and procedures, Lee, and I just have to refine that a little bit. A policy is a decision that you make that applies to your organization. That's what a policy is. A policy doc is a policy statement, is a decision. So your policy, if you have a policy about visitors, it should contain only the things that are your decisions. A policy about employment, for instance, are the things that you have decided. That's your policy. Policy that even says, you said overriding thoughts and values, a policy that says employees may not carry on illegal premises. Employees may not use illegal drugs on the premise. That's not your decision. That's somebody else's decision. And it doesn't belong in your policy because it's not a decision you make. If it comes to a contest between the courts deciding the decision you make, following the rule based on the wording in your policy, or following the rule based on the wording in the criminal code, you're going to lose every time. Real life example, I have to tell you, that is the sexual harassment claims. Okay, a lot of people with sexual harassment policies have put a definition of sexual harassment into the policy. Sexual harassment is what the Supreme Court says it is. It's not what your organization says it is. And where your organization definition conflicts with the Supreme Court, you will lose every time. So you can't usurp decisions that are above you. And there's a bit of a message that's there when the company's employment policy says, for instance, you will not engage in illegal, taking illegal drugs on our premises. There's a message there that says, you know, if we fire you, it's not because you broke the law, it's because you broke our policy. We don't care that the law said you can't have illegal drugs. What's more important is that our policy said you can't do it, and that's what you broke. We do not carry out. So your decision there, Lee, is, for instance, is very good. Decision to say, we terminate employment in the case of law breaking, or worded a little gently, but that is your decision on what you do in the face of an action or situation that you get. Our policy is that we terminate employment when someone's been found guilty of breaking the law or whatever. That's perfectly fine. Okay, any thoughts? All right, so I'm going to go back to, are we still seeing employee file access? Is that what we're still seeing on screen? There's the last slide there. I'm going to slide only. There we go. That should be centered now. You are welcome to hit me up on LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter, whatever, if you want to throw some stuff at me. Happy always to see stuff, good stuff and bad stuff too. You know, I love collecting samples of this stuff. Kenshin, please, and you're welcome to you're welcome to voice it if that's easier. Oh, okay. Okay, Patricia, I am throwing it back at you.
Well, Lewis, I'd like to thank you very much for this interesting discussion today. And say well done. It's one of the best uses of chat room I've seen. As of late, you obviously use this in what you do. I'm sure many of us will be going back and looking at policies very differently, both in our professional and personal lives, with a bit of a new lens. I'm thinking of one or two right now that I would like to change on our website with permission. Just a reminder that the taping of this, the link will be sent out within a week, and it will also be available on our website for anyone who wants to, who may have missed the live session. But I just wanted to give everyone and say thank you for attending today's session. Definitely stay healthy and have a great rest of your day. Thanks so much.